All right, let's get more analysis on developments at that Northwest ANC elective conference. I'm now joined by political analyst Lukhona Mnguni. Lukhona, thank you very much for joining us and indulging us and staying a bit on.
Yeah, you don't want me to leave the building,
yes,
isn't it?
we need to dissect all of this. The absence of presence is among us right now. And he's saying it was as simple as the ANC merely either extending the mandate of the IPC, acknowledging the concerns of the people. Is it really that simple? What does the Constitution say?
Well, he's quite correct to say if you dissolve a provincial executive committee, you do have to put in place an interim structure. And the idea of an interim structure is really just that. There's no permanence. It's not an elected structure. Therefore, it is there to fulfill certain mandates. Chief amongst those is to lead that particular structure, the region or a province, to the next conference so that there is elected leadership. Because the constitution of the ANC is quite clear. The greatest powers of running the organization are given to elected executive committees, be it at a branch level, at a regional, at a national, and at a provincial level. But this also demonstrates the failures of the ANC insofar as its administrative capacity is concerned. And this is a problem particularly in the Northwest and a problem also in the Western Cape, where almost these structures have just been allowed to be as interim in perpetuity. And of course, there was COVID. We understand that it did play a role, but some of these interim structures predate COVID-19, right?
And it was just a simple pen where you sit, you decide to extend the mandate.
Yes, but then of course there will always be political considerations. How soon do you go to a provincial executive committee with the possibility of getting an outcome that is not desirable to those who are trying to drive the process, right? So the problem is that in politics, not everything is just running smoothly for the sake of running. Certain things are held back because of political considerations. And I think for the Northwest, if you remember how that PEC was dissolved and just how widespread there was even violence in the town of Mahikeng, there were calls for Supra Mahlangu to resign as the premier, and he did that, and eventually he went to court to challenge the first dissolution of the PEC in Northwest, and he was successful, in actual fact, in the South Gauteng High Court, and they still went again for a political solution, which was not what was legally what needed to happen, because they needed him to go. Certain people needed that PEC led by Supra to go, and I think the ANC keeps having itself in a bind by always making political considerations that do not always accord with what is legal and what is administrative. And at times there's just a lapse in memory and judgment, which talks about whether or not they take themselves seriously in how they operate the organization.
But then now we've got the ANC conceding at the very least that yes, these 20 members will not be participating, they won't be voting. But then, are there no far-reaching implications? Because we do know now that others have rushed to court yet again to say the outcomes of that conference should also be nullified now, because we've got an IPC that convened this conference and they were in fact illegitimate in that regard. Is that not going to be a problem?
Well, technically it might be. We would have to wait what the court will say in that respect. But I think politically, the mature thing for everybody to do is, one, did the IPC convene the conference within the prescripts of the Constitution? Did they follow the branch audit guidelines? Are the branches that are constituting this conference the correct branches? Was there no manipulation of the process? Was there no attempt to shut off certain branches from participation? Once you cross and tick those boxes, I think if the feeling in the room is that everything was done according to the book and to the Constitution, then let the conference go ahead and elect a leadership that's going to lead the province, because ultimately the IPC is merely an administrative structure to take you to the next conference. Because if you nullify this conference, all that you are inviting is for the NEC to go back and appoint another interim structure, which could actually be the same interim structure, and say, prepare for conference. And then maybe they call a conference a month later, 2 months later. There has to be a point of political maturity maturity and meeting of minds. And unfortunately, that sense of factionalism and polarization, at times people literally take action in the ANC to stamp the authority of a faction rather than to look out for the best outcomes and the best results for the organization. The truth is that in the Northwest, the ANC needs to stabilize itself if it is ready to start planning for the 2024 provincial elections and making sure that it unifies everybody behind a campaign. Because, I mean, how many people are running for chairperson?
That on its own was indicative of a party that is honestly not unified.
Absolutely.
They couldn't at least somehow gather and say, at least let's have two candidates.
These two, or at least three candidates.
It was
beyond that, and partly it's what I call the phenomenon in my language, we say, ucingo luwile. So the fence has fallen. Everybody can, anything can literally just get through that fence.
And 4 of those candidates were said to be pro-Ramaphosa's second term. So you even see that there are clear distinctions that there may be a national race, but provincially there are self-interests here, that people would say, I will still support Ramaphosa, but I also want to lead in this province.
Absolutely. In most provinces, that does become the case, where the regional dynamics are far different to the national dynamics. Quite easy to solve the national dynamics and who we support. But in how you resolve the regional dynamics, it's also possible to create a schism that seeks to part ways on the national question, just simply because we disagreed, and the disagreement was just so brutal, so fractious, and just, so personally denting. Because some of the songs that are sang at times, some of the things that are said about people in these campaigns in the lead up to the voting are actually very, very worrying and troublesome insofar as, are these the same comrades who actually speak this way of each other and make attempts to, outshine the other through devious means and not necessarily politicking in the sense that we know it? And once that happens, people who agreed on a national campaign suddenly no longer agree, and it divides further the province. And so all I'm suggesting is that in a province such as the Northwest, you do need a sense of structures, stability, and some degree of, mending the factions that have been there towards the 2024 elections. Otherwise, they will be faced with a serious challenge.
But then what does this say about that IPC of Hlomani Chauke? I mean, what does it say about his abilities to unite in this instance? Because if you had 5 candidates, it clearly is very telling of his inability to unify and at least have 1 or 2 candidates.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a Chauke problem. In KZN, we potentially had 4 chairpersons, chairperson nominees. Nomusa Dube didn't meet thresholds. Sandile Zungu declined nomination after he had been on a campaign as well to present himself as an alternative in terms of leading the ANC. I do think that when an organization such as the ANC is confronted with the serious potential to lose power, everybody almost wants in before the organization loses power. You're going to see there's a potential stampede, for example, in the national leadership race in the position of deputy president. I mean, how many people already are being touted as the potentials? Your Paul Mashatile, your Mamuluku Kubai, your Ronald Lamula. And of course, the incumbent hasn't said that he's leaving.
And we know him for surprises. He might actually avail himself at the last minute. So we really don't know. But then as for Supra, it seems, I don't know if this might become the trend. How much support does he enjoy right now? Because we've seen ever so often that incumbency curse, where you had a Bushi now or a Hlomani, and then suddenly they feel that perhaps the predecessor wasn't so bad after all. We've seen it happen so many times, even with the former president, Jacob Zuma. Some who actually wanted him to leave would want him to come back even now. So do you think at this point he does enjoy that kind of a support?
He definitely has some support. The measure of it is definitely going to be in how it translates now. So let's go back to the point you made. You say 4 of the chairperson nominees are people who support President Ramaphosa. So what are they doing? In proverbial terms, they are dividing the vote in their own faction, which then may make the prospects of a Supra even much more higher. Not necessarily because he has the majority support, but because maybe the majority has been so divided across a different number of candidates that he emerges. Also, there has been a vacuum since he left office. So had there been a provincial structure that had been elected, that we can measure how it has performed, really this is about an interim provincial committee that was put in place to coordinate activities, build the structures of the ANC, and take the province to a conference. So there has been a vacuum. So there is no a distinct ability to measure whether or not he has lost support. However, we do know that from other areas and regions, once a leader leaves a province, which was their base and really gave them enough political power and muscle to box and punch at the national level, they tend to erode that constituency as they are now focused on national issues. Now Supra spends most of his time in the National Assembly in Cape Town. It's the same effect that we have seen with the Deputy President of the ANC, David Mabuza, that after he left Mpumalanga, his influence and power in Mpumalanga is absolutely much less now than it was in 2017. Ace Magashule in the Free State, Paul Mashatile in Gauteng, right? He's not as influential as he was when he was chairperson here. So generally the trend, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, when he left KwaZulu-Natal, became Treasurer General and was now putting up his hand to be considered, I think, for president at first. Only 6 branches in KwaZulu-Natal nominated him. So that's how much you erode that constituency at times. And that's because by the time you leave, perhaps a lot of people are disgruntled with how you've led, the missed opportunities under your leadership, and they actually want you gone and they second you to upper structures. So we are definitely confronted with an interesting test case in Supra, because ordinarily former chairpersons who have left don't tend to return and contest. So this is going to be an interesting test case.
No, very interesting dynamic. Lukhona, thank you very much for your insights. That's political analyst Lukhona Mnguni.